Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Twitter fiasco, for lack of a better word, and we're going to move forward to present time without getting too much into the history of it. But we are going to delve into a little bit of the new leadership, some of the lawsuits that are being threatened, all of this we're going to look at from various angles. Before we get into that, I do want to remind you it's on everybody's plate right now. We all know tomorrow's election day. But I really want to make sure that you've either voted already or in ideal situation, you go in person on the day of. So tomorrow you go in person and cast your opinion. Just please, at least get your voice heard. I know there's a lot of communication or conversation around the fact that, hey, my voice doesn't matter and it hasn't mattered for years. Well, in fact, it does. And we're seeing that even in cases where a candidate wins by a very, very small margin because of the switches happening. It, it, there's a huge, we've got to have the evidence of who everybody's actually voting for, and those opinions really do matter. And we've seen that from county to state to Senate to wherever we're looking at, those people who are rising up in voice, who are getting others to get out the vote and get down there and give their opinion, and also those individuals who are truly serving us by monitoring the polls, whether inside or outside, but monitoring that, hey, there's another drop box in the dark with no cameras around it. And why did that white van come and pick up the stuff from the outside, from inside of it? People are reporting this. I saw this in Mountain View, and I went up and I asked the individuals in the white van, it was a rental van, who are you? What are you doing? And they said, oh, we're with the city. I said, well, where are the cameras monitoring this? Well, there's none. Well, do you work for the city? No, we're contractors. This game doesn't stop. And I'll also point out that during the last cycle that we had, so about 4 or 5 months ago, when I went in to cast my opinion, I was told that I couldn't, that they were actually shredding my ballot was the threat right in front of me. So they offered to give it back and told me to leave. It just, the games don't stop. We are not in a third world country, but we're driving there mighty, mighty fast. So again, make sure you go in person tomorrow and let your voice be heard. One way or another, at least get it documented, the direction in which your opinion matters. Now let's get back into Twitter here for a moment. I'm going to spend a little time on this article, then as is my style, I've got, you can see on the left-hand side, a number of other articles and concepts pulled up that we'll walk through. But this one is really interesting because it's being spun in so many directions. And this isn't the best article out there. This is just happens to be the one that was up on my dashboard when I opened up this morning. I don't know this individual, Jeff Parsons, writing for Metro. There's a lot of key concepts in here. So Twitter asked laid off staff to please come back as Jack Dorsey breaks silence. So there's two different parts here. First of all, there was a kind of a got you or a see we told you. Whenever we leave a job or we're forced out of a job, we always like to think, hey, I'm so important that this can't run without me. Well, most of us have gone beyond that and we're not narcissistic, but we do know that you have a piece of a puzzle. And unless somebody else is trained in that piece of the puzzle, there will be a little bit of a limping period for the company to kind of fill that gap. So when mass layoffs happen, the reality is those who had been planned as part of secession are also usually wiped out with that wave. So there was an article that came out last week that had the breakdown of layoffs for Twitter in San Francisco, in San Jose, and I believe the third was San Diego, but I can't remember the third city. But it said by mid-level manager, by hands up employee doing independent work, doing the different breakdowns, what the percentages were, and it came out to less than 800 people. Yet over and over again we've been told that they did layoffs in the number of 50%, knowing that they have over 7,500 employees. The estimate was that they actually did a layoff around 3,800. I haven't seen the breakdown of those numbers yet. I've only seen this 700 to 800 model there. But if we look at the first part of this, Twitter asked laid off staff to please come back. Well, we often see this in the tech world. Tech companies are key for manipulating employees. And if you can get somebody off your books to a termination and then invite them back, normally, and I don't know, I haven't seen the agreements here, but that 3 month severage may or may not still be allowable to be kept. You might waive that in order to come back to work. If so, then usually the first offer is the best offer. So after working a few months, there may not be another offer. But the terms are different. Management is different. New boss doesn't seem to be same as the old. I'm not saying it's better, but it doesn't seem to be the same as the old. So the terms are going to be different under a rehire situation. These people were severed from the company. Their accrued time off may or may not be continuous. It may be under another company model. The amount of days, PTO days, how they roll that up, may be shifted. Salary may be different. There could be a lot of different reasons why the layoff happened, but I can guarantee it was not an accident. The numbers were swift, and the numbers are accountable. The individuals who have come into this new leadership realm are absolutely brilliant on multiple levels. They understand the human capital resource is a major piece of this company. So they weren't going to over terminate, but they also understand that the human capital resource was really the chain that was dragging this company down. And one person maybe with a foot on each side of those categories. They may be a genius with the programming and creating algorithms that are highly swayed in one direction. So weeding through this may take some time. Now, there's many people who pop to the top, as we saw on the Twitter feed, individuals saying, hey, this isn't fair, or hey, I'm suing, or hey, I'm unfortunately, I'll dig into this one in a moment. I mean, I'll dig into this one for a moment. And there's a lot of opinions on this, but there was one article of a woman 9 months pregnant. I'm sorry, with a 9 month old baby, 8 months pregnant. Twitter has a very, very generous leave policy, not only for the individual, but for the partner. So even if your wife has been pregnant, you could take time off to be with that person. And of course, this whole LGBTQ is it woven within the structure of Twitter. So your partner adopts, and all of a sudden you can, just like we saw from the head of transportation from the federal government. And there's a lot of manipulation there of work or no work. But the bottom line is, for any of us who have had children, you understand that 9 months is a child that needs to be watched, needs to be fed, needs to be changed. Now, I don't know what the income level is. A lot of the individuals in these tech companies also have nannies and extra support. I don't know that in this case. I didn't even bother looking up the individual. But what I do know is when I worked for the federal government, they found out I was pregnant and they terminated me immediately. I remember spending those months up until birth doing all I could to interview for other opportunities, and I was blocked for reasons that I have stated openly in other segments. But as soon as the most beautiful, precious gift I've ever received came into this world, I literally strapped him on the front of me and went into different resource facilities to apply for jobs, to network, to whatever it took. I needed income. And I've also gone through the outcome of what happened when I asked for help. This world is definitely slanted, but what I can tell you is a employee that works for Twitter in this capacity pretty much had 9 months of easygoing during COVID, where they didn't have to go into the office, and then they went ahead and got pregnant again and are going through the cycle again. Now, we've got government policies around this, and we want to increase families. There's a lot of great reasons why a company should support an individual. But when a company is actually a business and they require income and work in exchange for an individual income in order to succeed, we're seeing that this is one example of the social system that was created within Twitter. Now, this isn't a judgment again on the individual or family or the policy. It's just a reality of things aren't free. If they're not paid by one, they're paid by another. So in this case, as Twitter asked layoff staff to please come back, it wasn't across the board all of them. And I guarantee there are changes to terms. It'll be interesting as that information actually comes out. Now, the second part of this looks at Jack Dorsey breaks his silence. Now, we saw over the weekend a tweet from a Dorsey who said that he was apologizing that he grew the company too fast, and that's why they were having to do so many layoffs. I don't know what kind of malarkey that is. The company's been around a while. They growing too fast is one thing. Growing irresponsibly is different. And they got caught with their hands in the cookie jar multiple times. Many people lost their jobs because of what they did. Their policies affected the last voting period. It's serious crimes have been committed within this company. But here it says just days after remotely locking workers out of their laptops and blocking their office key cards while they slept, they try to angle this. They did it, period. It doesn't matter when they did it. The social media giant has had a change of heart. No, they haven't. Citing unnamed sources, Bloomberg reported that Twitter feels it may have been firing too hasty firing around 3,800 people from across the country. Again, we haven't seen that number validated anywhere. The company is reaching out to ex-employees on Slack to see if they will be willing to return. Now, before, remember, they terminated people by email, not by Slack. If you were being asked to stay, then you got something in your work email. If you were being asked to leave or you had been cut off, it would be sent to your private email. Now, why would they notify somebody via one channel and then go to another channel to try and bring them back? There's a lot of misinformation here. And then they state that some of these include developers on both the Android and iOS side. And then Jack Dorsey is said to speak up. So we really want to look at the facts here. What is actually going on? And here it reiterates as well, personal email. So really look at these stories. At one, we know that there's information that just doesn't seem to be up and up. We also understand that this is a highly slanted, this is an opinion article more than just the facts. The key words we see slanted in one direction to pull emotion against, oh, these poor employees. Oh, these poor employees who did all they could to get out their opinion and have been part of stealing this country. So this was the core of what I wanted to start with today. I want to work through some of these. One of the lawsuits that is being threatened to file is saying that Twitter did not comply with the WARN Act. What is the WARN Act? Well, we've all heard about this on some level, and I just have this Wikipedia piece up here. The Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act of 1988 is a U.S. labor law which protects employees, their families, and communities by requiring most employers with 100 or more employees to provide 60 calendar day advance notification of plant closings and mass layoffs of employees, as defined in the Act. In 2001, there were about 2,000 mass layoffs and plant closures, which were subject to WARN advance notification requirements, which affected about 660,000 employees. Now, if we take that, we think, oh, good. If you're a company and you're going to do a mass layoff, you need to be responsible to give the government a heads up, because maybe the unemployment may need to be paid and they need to sweep around the funds. No, it's not really tied to that. But what I can tell you is 2001, I actually worked for the Office of Economic Development. And one of the metrics we looked at was how many people kept their jobs or were laid off during that period of time. And we never got the solid numbers of the actual layoffs or how many were affected, but you could walk out your front door and see that nobody else on the block had a job. Or one person may have had a job out of a household and all the rest lost their jobs. It was very clear to see there was mass impact during that period of time. Now, of course, I'm in Silicon Valley in a tech-centered world where we got hit very, very hard, but it was obvious. And at one point, the Office of Economic Development acknowledged a number of 8% of the population had been laid off. And that's as high as they would go. They kept bumping it right back down to 5%. They figured a 5% threshold was appropriate. Now, they did this by manipulating the numbers. If you were older and they figured, well, you shouldn't have had a job anyways or relied on that job, then you didn't count. If you were younger, like a teenager with a job that helped support the family or paid for your car, that didn't count because you weren't in that working age. If you had been unemployed for a certain period of time, then you don't count anymore because you didn't get a new job and they just keep you on the books for so long. If you applied for unemployment, you seem to count if you got it. But if you were denied unemployment, you didn't seem to get counted. Now we knew that the number of unemployed was closer to 1 in 3 individuals, right? We were looking at not quite 33%, but in that neighborhood. And yet again, the numbers never even got close to 8%. But our organization was responsible for execution around the WARN Act. And we would send out threats, but the threats were not any stronger than Department of Fair Employment of Housing or Department of Labor right now. In fact, I mentioned about a month ago, I contacted Department of Labor to get some stats and to ask some questions. And somebody kindly called me back and said, under this administration, they're not allowed to investigate labor issues. And I said, I'm sorry, I thought I called the Department of Labor. And they said, yes. So this Department of Labor, this administration is even throttling assistance for employees. In fact, suppressing it. So if we go back to this WARN Act, if a company wants to work with the government to have the government come on site and assist with handing out pink slips and getting them involved in some kind of a bridge program for retraining or redoing their resume or finding out about new jobs, then that's why a company would contact the WARN under the WARN Act and get somebody from Office of Economic Development in. Now, what they do is they have what's called a rapid response team. These are nationwide. They're either funded directly by federal or a partnership between federal and the states, as my understanding, but they're usually rolled out at a city or county level. So rapid response comes out with a series of people in cars, or a lot of them have a moving van that will go to different neighborhoods or out to the offices, and employers can line up and get assistance that they need. But what happens here? First of all, we don't trust our government right now. And years and years and years, I found myself laid off. And ironically enough, it was from the Office of Economic Development. And I knew the program from the theory side. I would say the practical side, but it was really the theory side, because once I found myself going through the process, all of a sudden I found out the whole scam that it was. It didn't do anything to help the companies, and it actually buried the employees. You have to have a proof of right to work in the United States, which requires uh, a variety of information, maybe a birth certificate, passport, ID. However, if you didn't have any of that, then they would help you anyways. It was just a different program. But if you had that, then they took that information and they literally sold it off to their other partners. And I know this because for the first time in my life, I ended up in collections. I got called from a third party overseas. I believe they were based out of Ireland, who was trying to get money from me for city college classes that I had taken while under the rapid response team of a retraining. And I said, I never participated in that school, that college, that program. Well, it didn't matter, because how do you refute something when you haven't been there? Their response was, well, you signed up and you didn't show up, so it still needs to be paid. Well, I never signed up. Therefore, I didn't show up because I didn't know about it. And yet these government programs hack and leak and scrape and share and sell your information. Everything about me was sold. So no, companies don't have to participate in this program. And the wise companies will never participate in this program. In fact, many will offer packages where you can receive a 3-month severance, a month and a half severance, whatever that amount is. And part of that package is work with a private company that will help redo your revenue, help you get reinstated in a new job. They'll spend that time with the individual and try to get them back to work through private companies as quickly as possible. This doesn't work, and it's another form of government intervention. Again and again, there's two doors in life. There's one marked security and one marked freedom. This WARN Act is under the notion of security. There's no freedom here. And it certainly pulls the government up inside the business of the company doing the layoff. So one of the threats that we had with Twitter is they were going to do a mass action because Twitter didn't give a 60-day notice for these layoffs. Now, I didn't pull apart, again, I kind of present the notion based on where I've been, but if anybody wants to dig a little deeper, you can see whether or not a change of ownership breaks that 60 days. First of all, the 60 days doesn't really matter because at worst, they will come in and fine the company for a layoff, and the fine is usually a tax, a voluntary tax. Most companies will just ignore the letter, and it doesn't go any further than that. It doesn't get attached to IRS. It doesn't go into collections. It's just, hey, if you want to give us money, you can give us money. We don't give it to your workers, but we'll take it as a government. So companies, once they've gone through the rodeo, they won't participate again. But it is very interesting to see that in the older terminology, if in fact the company had been acquired, bought, sold, then you don't have to give 30 days, 90 days notice. I'm sorry, 60 days notice at all. And it would be my assumption when a company is publicly traded and moves into private hands, that would break any responsibility to report under the WARN Act. But even if there is still a responsibility, enforcement, it's just not there. Okay, so here we've got Department of Labor, and this goes into a little bit more about employing and training administration. So what they want to do is provide a safety net, but we've learned that the government's assistance is not assistance that we want, and companies already know that. So if you wanted to learn more about the WARN Act, you would go to the Department of Labor, DOL.gov, and search for WARN. And that would be how you would find the compliance. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk about is California is an at-will state. Many states in the union at this point are at-will. That means that you can come and go as you please. You're free, but really that's not what it's there for. It's there so that companies can let you go and rehire you at their will. They don't have to give 2 weeks notice. In most cases, if you're being terminated by an employee, they will shut off your information, your access immediately, and then notify you that, oh, by the way, you've been terminated. Why? Because they don't want you sending out messages, contacting other employees, any kind of anger or upsetness. They don't want any of that. So they want to cut out your voice before you have an opportunity to do this. But the United States has moved into this level of at will so that companies can hire and pause employment as they need to. And so if there are exceptions to at will, usually, and this is still not the case, public sector, unionized, contract based, an employee refusing to violate public policy, an employee taking actions protected by public policy, an employer implying that there is a contract, a breach of good faith by the employer, an employer discriminating, an employee refusing to do something illegal, an employer retaliating against union members. These are the exceptions, but they can still terminate you for something else. And if you get over this hurdle, then the next time there's mass layoffs, which they typically happen every 7 years, obviously we've gone way beyond this in this stretch of time, then your name will just kind of slightly get slid over to that area and you'll be laid off in a mass. It happens all the time, and we don't have a firm excuse because the government's hold the cards. Maybe you didn't get that promotion. Maybe you've been sitting along the sidelines. But what I do want to see if this one had a little bit more. Aside from legal tussles over acquisitions and endless data breaches, they've also seen layoffs in the tech industry, a lot of them. So this is what's coming out recently. In 2022, there are a lot of companies doing layoffs. The government under the WARN Act only has so many resources, so many dollars. In fact, we'll see that under the 2001 mass layoffs that I mentioned, the Office of Economic Development partnered with um, unemployment, Office of Unemployment, OED, and that's the agency that would send out the unemployment checks. But two things happened. One is they didn't have enough money for all the unemployment. But how can they not have enough money? Money is taken out of our paychecks in order to pay for that unemployment as we need. It's unemployment insurance. It's either out of your paycheck, out of your employer's pocket, or a hybrid between the two. That money should be there. And there wasn't enough. State of California had to look towards federal government to heavily subsidize that. But the next thing happened. The trainings were horrid. They were absolutely ridiculous. They didn't have any job placement. Those who were hiring were actually exploiting the workers. They were selling off the data. And so as people went into the Office of into the unemployment offices, they were going in to complain. They weren't getting their checks. They weren't getting job opportunities. They weren't getting follow up. They'd signed up for classes that didn't exist. And so you know what the government did in order to support these individuals? They just shut down the offices. They said they didn't have enough employees to run them. Well, what about hiring from those that were unemployed? If you're giving them money anyways to sit at home and look for a job, why not hire them into an opportunity to have a job? But instead, they had messed up so bad, they didn't want to hear it anymore. And so they just locked down all the buildings and even added to the layoffs by laying off that staff. No, the WARN Act is not there to help. The government doesn't have proper planning, and they only go as far as they see fit. So tech layoffs are here. 72,000 job cuts in the US so far in 2022. Under this administration, we have not only seen entire industries shut down, like the oil and gas industry slowing and the Keystone pipeline shut down, but this last weekend we heard that coal plants were being shut down as we're going into winter and fuel prices are high. But we're seeing when you squeeze the economy so much and interest rates get higher so business doesn't have access to the loans, the job cuts eventually have to come. And these are tech layoffs. So as we move forward here, there's conversations of whether or not you should rehire um, an employee that you already terminated or laid off. Well, of course, in many cases, you should. They know the job, they know the people, they know the environment. Most employees are very sincere. They come into work for a paycheck, they go home and have their own life. You don't have a lot, it's a very small percentage of the population that's ever disgruntled or I mean, it's extremely small. So those are very valuable resources. But here in 2020, legislation was targeting companies that lay off employees and then rehire cheaper. So we see that constantly where somebody comes in and one day they're just their job is to retrain or train a new staff, and that's the staff that's going to replace them. Well, often we see that in tech as well, and we specifically see it in the contracting space. Under the Microsoft lawsuit, you can only have an employee for up to 2 years in a contract status as working as a contractor, or you have to convert them as employee, meaning that they're part of your infrastructure. They're needed for the company. You can't churn and burn these employees because every 2 years you can terminate and give a lower package and lower package and lower package, and people aren't accruing additional time off or money towards their retirement. So it's a way to keep costs down. This didn't work in our benefit. Companies didn't end up bringing people around to 2 months, I'm sorry, to 2 years. In fact, they would often nudge it down to 18 months and then terminate and make you go to a different contracting company to beg for that job back. But no, legislation hasn't fixed that. And we know it hasn't fixed it because of all the jobs that they even close completely, the plants, and send the jobs overseas. They're much cheaper. We even saw that within our own Department of Labor and some of the The agencies that were responsible for monitoring this were sending the jobs overseas. But what's another main reason why a company like Twitter would not want to go to file under the WARN Act? Now, I haven't looked up under the list. Maybe they did file that they were planning to terminate. I do know that they had made mention that there probably would be termination, but I don't know if that was official or where that was. But what I do know is the media leaks. The media is not on our side, and the mainstream media is definitely propagandized at this point. So you can imagine if a company needs to keep their stock price high, make sure that their employees are motivated and not scared for their jobs or in fear of their jobs, that you don't want the information to leak that you're about to lay off half your company. So no, by going to a government agency and filing this information, which now becomes publicly available data, and if not immediately posted, which is part of what we saw under the patent crisis, that patents were being filed here and it would take 3, 5, 8 years to get through the patent process. Meanwhile, people in other countries were scraping the data and filing the patents overseas in order to gain a foothold. And by the time the patent came up in the United States, it pretty really had no legs because of bureaucracy here and what they would call transparency. But if it's not transparently posted, there's Freedom of Information Act, and people can request the information of who has filed in the next 60 days for mass layoffs. So no, companies have no motivation to air their dirty laundry in advance because it gives them no competitive edge. It sinks their stock price and it makes their employees start wasting time worrying about their job rather than doing their job. Now, it's another part of this Twitter controversy that's been very, very interesting, and of course AOC stepped in on this one, is why would they have to pay for the blue check mark? Well, how many companies that do you know that don't charge a fee for a product or a service? That's how they're in business. These aren't nonprofits, these are companies. And yet, an argument over charging for a software as a service platform, an SaaS, yes, it is a place to voice your opinion, but we've already been on the other side of that where half of the population couldn't voice their opinion anyways. So of course, a private company has a right to charge a service. Now, do you have to pay for that service? No, you don't. In fact, in this case, the fee for service is only for those who want verification. You can still use the platform or openly, and it's a different product for you. But it's interesting, those who spoke up and complained. This isn't a free world. There is nothing free. Things don't just come from the government for free, as an example. Government doesn't have money. Government takes money by either printing it illegally, takes money from these taxes that I talk about, finding different organizations and just putting in their coffers, maybe seizing company property, or through taxes. But they take from the people in order to give. The numbers are out of this world right now. The percentage of people in the United States who don't pay taxes, it's estimated in 2022 that about 72 billion people in the United States, that's B with the billion, will not be paying taxes for 2022. They don't make enough. So one, that tells us they're under the poverty line. And two, they're not contributing. But those same individuals, and this doesn't count the over 3.5 million of people who have helped themselves over the border, are sponging off, quote unquote, our government. But as we've all been very clear, the government doesn't have money. The government then taxes you, takes away from you. School isn't free. No, you don't just send your child to school and it's free. Property taxes have to pay for that. Other taxes help to pay for that. And parents volunteer. And yet, if you now have a number of children in a classroom that are not up to the same level of those who have been here year after year after year, you're holding down the rest of the class. Now, there can be another class, there could be aides, there could be, but all of that isn't free either. So where is that money coming from? So here we have fee for service, FFS, is a payment model where services are unbundled and paid for separately. And the example is healthcare. Healthcare isn't free. I'd like to say that, basic resources of food, water, and shelter are free. And we're finding out that that's not the case either. Even that water that you want, you have to pay for. There isn't open places to get water in most of this country, and certainly not in the cities. And so another comment that we looked at is to be or not to be the product doesn't matter. If you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. Now it says it's a popular phrase used to describe how social platforms work, but it is mostly missing the point. Let's look at a particular regular business. Normally, you'd have a business that offers a product or service to customers. So why in this case, without clicking on further, if you are not paying for the product, you are the product. How have tech companies gone through their years of growth, accepted onboarding of angel funds and venture funds and series A, B, C, whatever that level is, and hit an IPO with having no substantial revenue and certainly not making money because they're selling you as the product? Your data, your information, your tracking, the right to track you, the right to access your data. All of that is being sold. You are the product. Is Twitter going to change when people are paying for the blue check mark? Well, the way that Twitter is set up, just as any social media site, we have to see. Hopefully, the revenue will shift and the leadership will have more a common core of values that will realize that selling out your users isn't going to be a fruitful way to run a company. But until that day, we've absolutely seen the model by which Twitter has been earning their money. Now you say, well, advertisers pay. That's part of it, yes. But this company grew mighty, mighty fast. So, in what we would call in the hacker world, it grew at scale. It grew globally and it grew astronomically. It had help. So Twitter employees admitted to censoring information. They throttled it, they removed it, they blocked it, they even banned users. And here it says, this is toddstarnes.com, cancel culture. We're all commie. Twitter engineer admits censoring. If you look at James O'Keefe and all that he's gone through with the Project Veritas and the lawsuits that he's doing, Twitter employees admit to censoring right-leaning accounts. It wasn't everybody they were censoring. But what's interesting is now in this last week, we've seen that these social media sites not only admitted to censoring on their own accord, they worked as partners with the state. And I don't mean your individual state, but I mean with the state government. Our government asked them to set up a portal or what they called a dashboard where they would put specific names of individuals or content or keywords and said, hey, block it. And so this dashboard, there didn't even have to be a phone call or communication back and forth. What happened is that they would just post on this and there would be somebody assigned or a team assigned within each one of these social media companies. And as soon as the name caught up or information came up, then they gladly went over and took care of it. The government cannot ask a private company to do what the government cannot do. And how do we know they can't do that? We literally have a Bill of Rights as part of the Constitution that tells us we are allowed freedom of speech. So the government cannot violate that, although they have on many levels. They've been using third-party companies, as I've started all the way back with the aerospace. We've come all the way through to the cycle here of military defense and now social media companies of making sure that you're the product, censoring and monitoring you. And recall the Facebook. even manipulating your emotions as part of a game to see how far you'd go. So this is the Daily Wire. Bombshell report: Twitter employee admits to censoring conservatives, banning them for political reasons. And this was January 11th. This was 2018 Twitter. This problem's been going on a long time. Ryan Saavedra, and I'm not going to go through this whole article here, you see in my head here. Remember the engineer for Google? He went ahead and he started his, again in another cast here because it's not the forefront. But Google went so far as to terminate him and then send a welfare check to his home and have FBI break down his door and handcuff him on the sidewalk in front of his home in San Francisco. And when he said, look, I want to explain to you, I've been a target of such and such with Google, they backed down, apologized, and handcuffed him. They realized they had been tricked and fooled. And if I move forward again, remember Theranos. Theranos, that blood company that said that they could do the miraculous testing. They didn't get caught because of all the fraud, the lies, the deceit. They actually got caught because they had private, I don't even know what you'd call them at this point. At that point, they were referred to as private investigators, actually track down employees in their homes, monitor them, threaten them, and torture them. And I don't know that torture by, attacking physically, but they did a lot of mental games. And if that didn't rise to the level of what Theranos was doing, the rest would not have unraveled as it did. Now, eventually they would have gotten caught and it would have come out. Somebody would have turned on them, but it was really because of the mafia style activities that was going on that they got exposed. Why would a tech company engage in this? And yet we've seen it with most of the tech companies. They are the modern day mafia, and they're doing it in a world that we still think is separate from us. We still think that the virtual space, social media, blend for transhumanism, and the social credit score or social governance score that we are under right now, social governance score is definitely for companies, and I've listed the names of the banks who are monitoring corporations right now, and this is being rolled out as well, as we've already seen that the social credit score or social the individual score not only isn't conspiracy, it's been in China for years, and our tech individuals have had major meetings. In fact, a meeting with those in China who created the score, and even had the head who was prosecuting the Uyghurs, and I apologize on the pronunciation of that, putting them in internment camps and killing them alive for their organs. And our tech executives would sit right down along with them and learn what they could about how to monitor. Meanwhile, would come back here and silence us. So here, November 6, 2022, as I have said, Twitter's the lucky one. Twitter got bought, it's going to get gutted, and it'll have a chance to reopen as a town square. Facebook is not going to be so lucky. Facebook will get gutted. It'll be sold for parts, and it will never be on the powerful level it has been before. And people are going to argue for it, just like they argued for Twitter, because individuals have a lot wrapped up in Facebook. They've given their diary, their biography, their community with friends. They think they have some kind of control over this. But they're the ones who have been the lunch all the way along. Without paying, they've been the product. Facebook parent, Meta, to make massive layoffs could be bigger than Twitter's cuts, report says. And again, this was November 6th, so this was just yesterday. Here's the same name again that we saw in the other article. And that other article, let me go back, that was the one from 2018, right? He's been covering the tech industry for quite a while. Facebook's parent company Meta is reporting planning to start making wide-scale layoffs this week in what could be the largest the industry has seen in a very long time. The Wall Street Journal reported that the company informed employees to cancel travel plans this week as layoffs are expected to begin as soon as Wednesday, so 2 days off. The number of Meta's 87,000 employees that are expected to be laid off could be greater than the roughly 3,800 employees who were let go last week at Twitter. Can you imagine? We're getting closer to 100,000 employees are going to get laid off. Adding that this would be the first time that the company has made large-scale layoffs in its nearly two-decade history. Can you believe they've been around for almost 20 years of destruction, of lies, of manipulation, and propaganda? The report said that the company was planning to cut expenses by at least 10% in the coming months, in part through staff reduction. CEO told employees over the summer, realistically, there are probably a bunch of people at the company who shouldn't be here. Now, in any company, you've got individuals who kind of skate by. You've got executives that we talked about that just assign stretch assignments or show up for meetings and don't do the work and just kind of skate on by. There's a number of individuals who aren't in alignment with the company. There's a number of individuals who were mass hired in order to create a pyramid and really have no contribution. But I don't think this is what it is. CEO has definitely taken this government surveillance site in a specific direction, and not everybody believes in that direction. Are those the people he says shouldn't be there? So here we go. We're in for a rough ride. The economy is falling apart. Fuel prices are going through the roof for summer. We've got struggling supply chain issues uh, and mass layoffs. These people who sat behind computers and mocked us for years are actually going to feel the pain themselves. And I find it very sad. Not ever having been in that space before is going to be crushing for so many. But we have to understand that we are here for greater reasons. And although in the moment of the desperation that will come for so many of these, at a mass layoff at that, you're not going to go next door and get another job. But I do hope that we can rise up as a people and help one another. But we're not going to concede, and we're not going to step back and forget the last 3 years of gutting our society from one propaganda and disinformation, misinformation didn't happen. So it'll be wonderful as we move forward into the future and take one step at a time to see this country reborn again from people who truly have American values, who truly understand the role of God in this country and in this world, and those who truly see the benefit of choosing freedom over security every time. It is not that we shouldn't have social programs. It is not that we shouldn't have free schools. It's not, but when the government runs them as a security net, they're not free. You become the product. Your child becomes the product. In this case, we have a chance to create that parallel economy and build a very strong foundation as we bet on America, because America is truly the greatest country on this planet, and we will get it back. As always, may you have a blessed day.